From an early age, I found solace in long, open roads. As a teenager, I worked in my uncle's repair shop, learning the intricacies of engines and the satisfaction of fixing something broken. After high school, I earned my commercial driver's license, drawn to the independence trucking offered. For years, I crisscrossed the country, making connections with small-town folks and big-city strangers alike. One summer, while delivering hay bales to a remote farm in Nebraska, I encountered a family struggling with a failing well. Without hesitation, I offered my help, spending hours rigging a temporary solution until professional repairs could be made. That experience stuck with me, reminding me how small gestures could profoundly affect others. My marriage to Marcy was a whirlwind. We met at a diner during a layover, and her quick wit and charming laugh captivated me. Within 6 months, we exchanged vows, with dreams of a shared life built on trust and mutual goals. Yet, as time passed, cracks began to form, subtle but undeniable. On one particularly grueling route, I rescued a fellow trucker whose rig had flipped during a storm. While waiting for help, we shared stories over soggy sandwiches, and he confided in me about his failing marriage. His words echoed in my mind for weeks, making me question whether my own relationship with Marcy was as solid as I'd believed. My daughters, Linda and Lauren, became my anchor. Even when work kept me on the road for days or weeks, their nightly calls reminded me of my purpose. I dreamed of building a life where I could be more present, but the financial demands of our growing family kept me behind the wheel. One fortuitous trip through Texas changed everything. While delivering medical supplies, I stumbled upon a small farming community desperate to save their land from foreclosure. My involvement started with a single phone call and blossomed into a partnership that led to the founding of a village. That decision set the stage for both triumphs and heartbreaks that would define the next chapter of my life. Half a decade ago, an unplanned turn of events led me to create what is now a thriving settlement named Circumstances. Today, it's a home for 349 individuals, a community that emerged from an unexpected opportunity. It all began rather abruptly. After completing a delivery of specialty bandages in Texas, I was assigned a new route that promised an early return home. With my credentials for handling sensitive materials, I was among the few eligible for the task. The pickup was conveniently close, and the drop-off point was just an hour from home. Taking an alternate route cut my travel time significantly, leaving me hours ahead of schedule and opening a door I never anticipated. On my way back, I stopped at an intersection and noticed a hand-painted sign advertising land for sale, property that was about to be seized for unpaid taxes. Following the signs led me to a farmhouse where an elderly couple was struggling to keep up with rising property taxes. They were selling a portion of their land to hold onto their farm. After calling my dad, we decided to purchase the farm through our family trust at fair market value. This arrangement allowed the couple to stay in their home as long-term renters at an affordable rate. They were deeply appreciative and offered to help us in any way they could. We sectioned off 10 acres at the crossroads to build a gas station and convenience store, a smart investment since the nearest town was an hour away. I also suggested my dad acquire additional parcels of land surrounding the intersection. He successfully purchased 10 acres at each corner. While surveying the property, we discovered an underground river capable of supplying water to tens of thousands of people, making it ideal for future commercial development. By the time I finished my delivery and took another rush job, I still made it home on time. 6 months later, after a grueling 16-day haul, which included a breakdown, I finally completed my delivery early on a Wednesday morning, 12 hours ahead of schedule, and parked at the company yard. I picked up the keys to my freshly restored Ford truck, which had just undergone a complete overhaul during my time off. I had restored its body and frame, paid a local shop to repaint it, and had a new engine installed by Jameson's Auto. Once a weathered red, the truck now gleamed in midnight black with chrome accents and a freshly painted tailgate featuring the iconic Ford logo. It looked showroom new, even qualifying for collector plates. That evening, I arrived home in time for dinner, ready to savor a quiet night with my wife, Marcy, and our 2 daughters. After 16 days on the road, I was thrilled to be back early, eager to surprise Marcy before her workday began at 9 a.m. But as I approached our street at 8 a.m., my excitement turned to confusion. Parked in our driveway was a truck that didn't belong there. Jack Reddings, the son of my boss and my co-driver. Jack was notorious for being loudmouthed and a bit of a troublemaker. I parked discreetly down the street and watched, My heart sank as Marcy and Jack exited the house together with my daughters. Jack was carrying a trucker's rig bag, and it was clear they were dropping the girls off at school after missing the bus. Before loading the kids into the car, Marcy and Jack shared an embrace that was far too intimate for mere acquaintances. The scene left no doubt. This wasn't a new development. I filmed the interaction on my phone. They didn't notice me as they drove off. My truck was unrecognizable in its new look. Once they were gone, I pulled into the driveway to investigate. The house initially seemed normal. My daughter's rooms were untouched, as was the master bedroom. Everything was in its place, down to the neatly made bed, which felt odd given the rushed morning. Still, something compelled me to dig deeper. I searched every corner, from the basement to the main floor, but found nothing unusual, until I noticed a faint glow coming from under the door to the unfinished third floor. Curiosity got the better of me. That space was typically dark and unused, so the light was unexpected. I climbed the stairs and opened the door, stunned to discover the area fully renovated. Sunlight streamed through open curtains, illuminating a luxurious master suite with a king-sized bed, walk-in closets, a sitting area with a TV, and an ensuite bathroom. None of these changes had ever been discussed with me. On a small table, I found adult DVDs, something Marcy had always condemned. When I turned on the TV and played one of the discs, my stomach churned. The video featured Marcy performing a sexual act she had always refused to do with me. Watching her enthusiasm was devastating. The woman I thought I knew had embraced something she once called disgusting. On a coffee table across the room was a handmade card that read, "We love you, Uncle Jack," signed by my kids. I felt sick. The signs were undeniable. Jack wasn't just Marcy's lover. They were working to make him part of my children's lives. The disheveled bed, discarded lingerie I'd never seen before, and the unmistakable smell of recent closeness painted a grim picture. The walk-in closet told a similar story. One side held Jack's oversized clothes, while the other was filled with Marcy's, including provocative outfits she had never worn for me. The betrayal was glaringly obvious. I recorded everything in the room, making sure to document the oversized shirts, the DVDs, and even a framed photo of Jack with his parents. Standing in front of a mirror, I held up one of Jack's shirts to emphasize how it couldn't possibly belong to me. Finally, I rewound the disc and filmed its contents. Marcy and Jack, intimately involved, with Jack clearly visible. When I finished, I saved all the footage. The evidence was damning. There was no turning back from this revelation. I went down to the basement, grabbed my suitcase, and began throwing in my clothes. Before I left, I returned upstairs to the third floor and took the disc containing the explicit video, slipping it into my luggage. Once everything was packed, I left the bags by the front door and moved on to handle more pressing issues. The first call I made was to my father to check on the status of the store project. He told me construction was progressing well, including a 3-bedroom apartment being built on the second floor. He also mentioned we had secured a franchise deal, which would be a major advantage. When I asked how long until everything was ready, he estimated about 10 weeks. "I'll take over the store and live in the apartment," I said. "Also, I need you to find me a solid civil attorney and a top-notch divorce lawyer. I'll explain later." After that, I called the farmer who had sold us the land and asked if he had a room I could use until the apartment was finished. Without hesitation, he offered me a place to stay, refusing any payment and reminding me of how much he appreciated what my family had done for him. I let him know I'd arrived the next day. By mid-morning, I walked into my boss, Jace Redding's office, and quit on the spot. Naturally, he asked why, so I showed him footage of the finished third floor of my house, including a framed photo of him with his family. His face darkened as he realized what he was looking at. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice tense. "It's from my own house," I replied flatly. "That part of the house wasn't supposed to be remodeled." I followed that by showing him a short clip of his son, Jack, engaged in an explicit act with my wife, Marcy. Jace, a man known for his staunch religious beliefs, looked utterly disgusted. "That's my wife," I said, keeping my tone steady. "This is why I'm leaving. I need to focus on fighting for custody of my daughters." Jace didn't hesitate to call his accountant, instructing him to cut my final paycheck and add a $10,000 bonus as compensation for his son's betrayal. He looked at me apologetically. "Are you sure the kids aren't his?" he asked hesitantly. "I'm certain," I said. "This has been going on for some time, but not long enough for that." He suggested I consider a DNA test, but I told him that Jack could request one if he felt the need. I also asked Jace to keep everything I'd shared with him private. as I wanted Marcy to discover later that her secret was out. "I'm ashamed of what my son's done," Jace said after a long silence. "When he gets back, he's finished. We've had rumors about him being involved with married women, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined." True to his word, Jace fired Jack and cut him out of the family inheritance, citing his disgraceful behavior and the injury he'd caused. Later, after cashing my check, draining the joint accounts, and settling my bill at the auto shop, I went to my daughter's school. I arranged to meet with them in the presence of their guidance counselor to ensure there was no chance of my intentions being misinterpreted. During the conversation, I learned that Jack had been living upstairs for 3 years. Marcy had introduced him to the girls as a distant cousin, and over time, he became a regular presence in their lives. Eventually, Marcy insisted the girls refer to him as Uncle. I decided it was time to be honest with them. I explained that Jack wasn't family, but was, in fact, their mother's lover. I told them about the divorce, and that, for now, they would remain with Marcy until I could establish a stable home and fight for custody. The counselor supported my approach and provided her contact information. "Tell your lawyer to reach out to me," she said. "I'll give a statement. Too many fathers lose their kids unfairly in situations like this." I hugged my daughters and watched them return to class, feeling a renewed sense of purpose to build a better life for them. Before heading home, I stopped at a flower shop and asked for the oldest, most wilted flowers they had. After some initial confusion, the clerk brought out a batch from the trash, which I had boxed up. Back at the house, I placed the box on the master bed, along with the card my daughters had signed for Uncle Jack and a shredded piece of Marcy's baby doll lingerie. I'd cut it apart with her sewing scissors as a final touch. After that, I loaded my tools into my truck, securing them with a tarp to keep them safe. While I worked, my neighbor, John, came over. "I guess you finally found out about Marcy's second husband," he said casually. "Second husband?" I asked, startled. "Yeah, that's what we all called him. He's been around for years." "I just learned today," I admitted. "It's been going on for at least 3 years. I quit my job this morning. I'm going to focus on proving I can provide a stable home and fight for custody of my daughters." John offered to let me park my truck in his garage and suggested I stick around to see how things played out that evening. I agreed and moved the truck. That night, I watched from John's garage as Marcy arrived home. She went straight to the bedroom, where she found the box on the bed. At first, she smiled, likely thinking it was a gift from Jack. She picked up the card and set it aside, then reached for the baby doll lingerie. Her smile faltered as she realized it had been torn to shreds. Confusion flashed across her face, but she didn't seem to suspect anything yet. Finally, she opened the box of dead flowers. The stench hit her immediately, and she recoiled, looking both nauseous and puzzled. She seemed to assume the gesture was Jack's doing, perhaps an odd way of signaling the end of their affair. It was clear she hadn't connected the dots that I was the one behind it all. This was just the beginning. I had much more planned. I watched as my 2 daughters got off the school bus and headed toward the house. A text from Lauren popped up on my phone. "Call us, but don't say anything. We want you to hear what we have to tell Mom. She needs to hear the truth, just like you've always taught us." I explained the situation to my neighbor John, who was still nearby. When I put the call on speaker, "We'll need to stay completely quiet," I told him. "That way we can both hear everything clearly." The girls walked straight to their mother's bedroom. Marcy was still sitting there, clearly shaken and confused by the messages I had left earlier. She didn't seem to understand the full weight of what was happening. After greeting their mom as though it were just another day, my daughters began their conversation. "Dad called us out of class today. He said he wanted to talk to us in private," Linda started. From her expression, I could tell they had her attention. She looked concerned, unsure of what was coming. "He met us in the school counselor's office," Lauren added. "We didn't understand why, especially since you told us he wouldn't be home until 6. Then he asked Miss Connor, the counselor, to stay with us while he talked." The first thing Dad asked was, "Who is Uncle Jack and how long has he been staying with us?" Linda continued. "I explained that you told us he was a distant cousin who moved back to the area." Marcy's face changed immediately. Fear began to settle in. It was clear now that she knew who had left the messages in the bedroom. "Dad had no idea you had the 3rd floor renovated while he was on the road. You said it was supposed to be a surprise for him," Lauren said. "But now we know that wasn't true. We kept your secret like you asked. And wow, was it ever a surprise for Dad?" Linda added with a bitter edge. He told us he didn't find out about it until today, Lauren went on. Mom, you've always taught us not to lie, but I guess we figured out that it's okay for you to lie. To him, to us, to everyone in the family. Marcy started crying, tears streaming down her face. She didn't interrupt, she just listened. Dad didn't know Jack had been renting the third floor for over 3 years, Linda said. We had to explain to him that whenever he was away, you never slept in the bed you shared with him when he was home. We knew because the bed never needed to be made before you left for work, Lauren pointed out. Marcy's face turned pale. Her daughters were laying everything bare, and even something as small as an unmade bed had unraveled her. The same mother who always told them to start their day by making their beds was now caught by her own rules. We told Dad we never actually saw you and Uncle Jack together, but we did see you coming downstairs from the third floor in the mornings when he wasn't home, Lauren said. Dad told us that he and you are getting a divorce because Jack isn't family. He's your lover, the man you've been hiding from him for years. Linda's voice grew firmer. Dad told us that you've been using him for a long time to support Jack's lifestyle and yours, not for the good of our family. He said that makes him feel like his entire life with you has been a lie. He also said that since he quit his job today, he's going to start looking for something local so he can fight for custody of us. Miss Connor explained that Dad had no choice but to quit. Linda continued. She said the court wouldn't consider giving custody to a long-haul trucker. After he said goodbye, we went back to class, but it was hard to focus. Marcy sat on the bed, her body shaking as she cried. She couldn't deny what they were saying. It was all true. She knew Heath was preparing to fight for custody, and as a social worker, she was well aware of what the court would consider in their evaluations. Eventually, we broke down in class, Linda said quietly. Miss Connor had to pull us out for the rest of the day to talk things through and help us calm down. We learned something new today, Mom, Lauren said, her voice cutting. Sleeping with another man while you're married is infidelity. Miss Connor said it's the biggest insult one spouse can give the other. If it mattered to you, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, Linda added. Miss Connor wondered how you thought you could live with 2 husbands and no one would notice. Marcy seemed to mutter something to herself, but it wasn't audible. She must have been trying to rationalize things, probably thinking Heath was her husband and Jack was just a lover, but even she seemed to realize that to everyone else, it looked like she'd been living a double life. Lauren's voice broke the silence. Linda and I talked, and we decided that you must not only hate Dad, but probably hate us too. That's the only explanation for why you did this for so long. Linda chimed in, her words sharp and deliberate. Miss Connor told us that no one who loves or respects their spouse would ever treat them the way you treated Dad. She said what you did is beyond cruel. Marcy's sobs grew louder, her body trembling. She never expected to be confronted like this, least of all by her own daughters. Their words were blunt and unflinching, forcing her to see the consequences of her actions. Before we got on the bus, Linda said, Miss Connor asked if we felt okay to go home or if we needed her to drive us. We told her we'd be fine. We wanted time to talk. She also said she would testify about what happened today if it comes up in court, Lauren added. She's seen too many men ruined by lies like this and said she has a duty to tell the truth. We whispered a lot on the bus ride home, Linda concluded. We've made some decisions of our own. Marcy completely broke down, burying her face in her hands. Mom, Lauren began firmly, we may only be 12, but it won't be long before we're old enough to decide who we want to live with. Miss Connor told us that when we turn 13, we can make that decision ourselves. And we've already decided it's going to be Dad, Lauren continued without hesitation. We're going downstairs to call Grandma. She'll come and get us, and I'm sure she and Grandpa will let us stay with them until Dad has things sorted out. That way, you and Jack can have the whole house to yourselves. She turned to Linda. Let's go pack and make the call. Before leaving the room, Linda turned back to their mother. One last question, Mom. Were you trying to make us bond with Uncle Jack so it would be easier for us to accept him as your second husband without Dad knowing? Her tone was cutting, because it sure seems like you were. Marcy didn't respond. She just sat there, devastated, tears streaming down her face, as her daughters walked out to call their grandmother. Her daughters had clearly inherited their father's logical approach to problems. They had pieced together the situation with unflinching clarity and drawn their own conclusions. I sent Marcy a quick text. What you found on the bed? That was me. Let your so-called common-law husband know I'll be suing him for financial support for you and the girls." From my vantage point with binoculars, I watched her slowly piece it all together. As she realized that I planned to present everything, her lies, her hidden lifestyle, her betrayal, in court, it became clear she understood she would lose any chance of keeping custody of our daughters. Marcy was defeated. She could see there was no good ending to this. The looming lawsuits and exposure of her relationship with Jack would destroy both of them. John and I timed it. Less than 15 minutes later, her parents arrived. John cracked open his front door, curious if the voices from next door would carry. They did, and they were loud enough to leave no doubt that tempers were flaring. Marcy's mother tore into her as she led the girls out the front door. Her anger was palpable, but it was her father who delivered the most brutal blow. "Well," he said coldly, "since you've driven Heath out of your life, I guess once things fall apart with Jack, you'll just find another long-distance driver to replace him. Jack's already shown he doesn't respect you. He's perfectly fine with you sleeping with someone else. And you've made it clear, by your behavior, that one man will never be enough to satisfy you." From where we stood, John and I could see Marcy crumble under her father's words. She was sobbing so hard she couldn't respond. Her mother added with icy finality, "We'll be contacting child services tomorrow to figure out the next steps. After all, it was your daughters who called us and explained why they wanted out of this house. They made us proud. They've clearly been raised well. Unfortunately, we can't say the same about you." John shut the door, then headed to his kitchen to grab a couple of beers. I followed him. "Your daughters nailed it, Heath," John said, handing me a beer. "You should be proud. To be honest, when the construction crew was working, Marcy told us the third floor was a rental unit. She claimed you needed extra income and had decided to rent it out." "That's a complete lie," I replied. "The house and land were fully paid for. I remodeled the entire place myself, floor by floor, just because I had the time and wanted to." "So she lied from day one," John said, shaking his head. "Where do you think the money came from to finish the third floor?" "Not from us," I said firmly. "I haven't seen a single cent of income from that so-called rental." "My guess? Jack used his trust fund to pay for it, and he probably reimbursed himself later." I pulled out my phone and selected Marcy's contact. "Let me know if you can spot her," I told John. "I want to send a text and see how she reacts." A couple of minutes later, John gave me the signal. "She's back in her bedroom. Looks like she's trying to calm down." I typed out a short, blunt message and hit send. "Hey, to the queen of open invitations, Jace Redding and I both want to know, given your long-term relationship with his son, are Linda and Lauren mine or Jack's? Jace plans to file a lawsuit to find out." John's reaction was immediate. "Oh my God, she's lost it," he said. "She just threw her phone against the wall." He peeked again. "Now she's on the bed sobbing like crazy." John turned back to me with a curious grin. "What on earth did you send her?" "Just the truth," I replied calmly. "Jace told me he's been hearing rumors for years about Jack being involved with a married woman. He said the husband didn't know. I figured it was time to ask a question that needs answering for everyone involved." John's face turned pale. He knew Jace's reputation and how far he'd go to uncover the truth. About 30 minutes later, I asked John to check on Marcy again. "She's in the living room now, sitting on the couch," he reported. I sent her the final blow, a 5-minute video clip of her performing an explicit act with Jack. The clip ended with Jack's face clearly visible. Along with it, I sent a single line. "Who filmed this?" After a moment, I sent a follow-up. "I took the disc. Maybe I'll figure out the answer when I watch more." John returned moments later, wide-eyed. "Marcy's lost it again. She threw up all over the living room rug." He looked at me, half laughing, half stunned. "I don't even want to know what you said this time." I left at 5 in the morning, heading out after sending videos to everyone we knew, friends and enemies alike. Along with the footage, I included a message. "This is what I showed to Jace Redding when he asked why I had to quit my job." The second video was filmed in the same bedroom with help from someone else. Neighbors say Jack Redding is Marcy's second husband, and Marcy told them I was fine with the arrangement. That's a lie. I found out yesterday, and I'm filing for divorce and suing Jack Redding for numerous reasons. It wasn't going to be a pleasant morning for many people. After sending the messages, I stopped at a truck stop on the edge of town and ordered a hearty trucker's breakfast. From my booth, I could see my truck parked just outside the window as I sipped my coffee. Marcy's younger sister, Maureen, walked in and spotted me. "I'm so sorry, Heath. No man deserves what you've been through," she said softly. "Mind if I join you?" I nodded and she slid into the seat across from me. For a moment, we sat in silence as I savored the coffee. "Mom and Dad told me everything last night," Maureen began. "The girls explained everything after they got to their house. Just so you know, this blindsided all of us." She paused, then added, "If you ever change your number, please let us know. We won't share it with Marcy." "The number isn't changing," I assured her. "I was planning to quit in 2 months anyway. The girls are getting older, and I wanted to be home in the evenings as they start their teenage years." Maureen's frustration spilled out. "What was my sister thinking? There's no way in hell you would have agreed to her having a second husband." "I doubt we'll ever really know," I replied. "Maybe it started as something innocent that went too far, or maybe she's been hiding her true self all along. Either way, she seemed to enjoy herself. From what I've heard, it's been going on a lot longer than the 3 years we know about." "What do you mean?" Maureen asked, her brow furrowing. "When I told Jace why I was quitting, he mentioned hearing rumors that Jack had been involved with a married woman for years. He even asked if Linda and Lauren might be Jack's children." Maureen's face went pale. "Oh, God. Who else knows?" I pulled out my phone and let her read the text I had sent Marcy the night before. Then I showed her the message I sent out that morning. As she scrolled through, tears welled up in her eyes. She already knew things were bad, but now it was clear they were far worse. The video hinted that their relationship wasn't just between two people. "By the end of today, everyone will know," I said. "Jace will go public in his pursuit of the truth. It's possible both girls are mine or both are Jack's, or maybe neither of us is their biological father. And now I'm left wondering if the person filming that video was male or female." Maureen noticed the tears in my eyes and moved to sit beside me. She held my hand and we sat quietly until the waitress came to take our order. When the food arrived, I reluctantly let go of her hand so I could eat. Heath and Marcy had married young, both just 19. Maureen, as the youngest bridesmaid, had been quietly infatuated with Heath from the start. Even back then, she thought he was the most handsome man she'd ever seen. And that feeling had never faded. Heath had taken on the demanding job of long-distance trucking so Marcy could finish her degree. When she graduated and started working for the state, she chose a posting in their hometown. At the time, Maureen didn't understand why, but now it was clear. Marcy wanted to be close to Jack, her first love, despite their parents' disapproval. Maureen glanced at Heath. She knew he wasn't ready to hear all of this. Over the years, Heath had been the person she leaned on, the one who helped her see life's problems from every angle. He had a way of turning mountains into molehills. She loved him deeply, and had always compared every man she met to him. No one ever measured up, but now she had to find a way to keep Heath in her life. When the time was right, she would make her feelings known. She was convinced that Marcy had married the wrong sister. "Heath, do you know where you'll be staying?" Maureen asked, breaking the silence. "Linda and Lauren told Mom and Dad they want to live with you. They're angry and hurt, but incredibly proud of their father. They told Mom and Dad they'd tell the court they want to live with you," she continued. "In the meantime, I can bring them to you on weekends if you'd like." I pulled out my notes and handed her an address. "My dad and I are building a gas station and convenience store near here. I'm staying with the farmer who rents the land from us for now, but I'll be moving into the 3-bedroom apartment we're building above the store once it's finished." "Why out there?" Maureen asked, puzzled. "We own 10 acres at each corner of the intersection," I explained. "We're planning to subdivide the land into 3/4-acre lots after developing it. There's nothing else in the area, so the store will be convenient for locals and a draw for others." "How did you even find it?" she asked, surprised. "I was cutting across the country to save time and stumbled on a sign at a 4-way stop. The traffic flow caught my attention. It'll support a business," I replied. Maureen nodded thoughtfully, understanding my reasoning. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the weight of the morning lingered. We both knew the coming days would be tumultuous, but for now, there was a sense of quiet understanding between us. After finishing breakfast, I picked up the check. Maureen leaned over, kissed me on the cheek, just like she always did, and smiled. "Heath," she said softly, "just remember, there are a lot of people who have always loved you for the good man you are." Her words stayed with me as I drove. I called my dad and filled him in on everything. Without hesitation, he promised to find me one of the best divorce attorneys available. The drive to my destination was about 75 miles. By the time I arrived at the construction site, it was a little past 8:30 a.m. A smile crept across my face when I saw the progress. Dad wasn't holding back. The design included 8 fuel pumps for cars and smaller commercial trucks, plus 2 designated for big rigs. The foundations for the spill containment system were already in place, and construction on the building's frame had started. Stepping into the construction trailer, I studied the plans Dad was working from. They were similar to his other projects, but this one included a spacious 400-square-foot apartment on the second floor. Seeing that addition made me smile. He clearly recognized the area's potential. After a couple of hours at the site, I headed over to the farm. Bill Robinson greeted me warmly as I pulled up. He admired my restored Ford truck, reminiscing about the days when vehicles were built tough, with speed and durability in mind. As I parked, Bill's wife, whom he fondly referred to as the Mrs., called us in for lunch. It was a hearty farmer's meal, and she chuckled at how much I ate. Afterward, I helped her clean up, drying dishes while she put away leftovers. She noticed my bare ring finger, but didn't comment. By the time we finished, a fresh pot of coffee was ready. We sat down, and I spent the next 2 hours recounting the chaos of the past 2 days. Bill assured me that my daughters and their Aunt Maureen would be welcome at the farm any time. "It'd be nice to have kids around again," he said. "Gives me an excuse to fire up the grill." I texted Maureen, inviting her to visit every Friday and stay through the weekend. She replied almost immediately. "It's a date." Later that afternoon, I reviewed the disc on my laptop. The video, unfortunately, didn't show any other faces. Using my phone as a hotspot, I sent everything to my father, including the contact information for Miss Connor, the school counselor. I also asked him to work with Jace Redding to pinpoint Jack's location and serve him as soon as possible. Marcy would be served at her office in town. For good measure, I uploaded the incriminating video and sent it along. Out of spite, I sent Marcy a text. "I've seen the whole video. Let's just say it's not award-winning material. Plenty of others have done better performances." By the time school let out, Maureen and my daughters were on the road. Maureen, a tax specialist, was thankfully in her slow season, giving her the flexibility to drive. The girls couldn't stop texting me, sending updates every 10 to 15 minutes. The 75-mile trip flew by, and they texted one last time when they reached the driveway. Linda and Lauren leaped out of the car and ran straight into my arms. Bill and the missus, whose name I finally learned was Betty, welcomed everyone warmly. The girls were thrilled with the room Betty had prepared for them. While she finished making dinner, Bill gave everyone a tour, pointing out the swing set, a swimming pond, and small motorcycles they could ride, with my permission. After dinner, the girls and I cleaned up the kitchen while Betty put away the dishes. Bill entertained them with stories about the farm and promised them a busy weekend of fun activities. Once the kids went to bed, Maureen and I had some time to talk. "Heath," she said, her voice heavy with emotion, "these past few days have been a whirlwind. Everything's coming out now. Jack was the boy Marcy used to sneak out to see when we were kids. That's how long they've been involved." I nodded, the pieces finally clicking into place. "It all makes sense now. I was the safe, dependable one. Jack was her wild side, and he took full advantage of that. He'll run when this all comes crashing down, and Marcy will be left with nothing." Maureen sighed. "Mom and Dad spoke with child services. If you give written permission, they can keep the girls until you're settled. They also interviewed the girls and told us there's no way Marcy will get custody. Her lifestyle disqualifies her completely." Her words hit me hard, and tears started streaming down my face. I tried to tell her to leave so I could process everything, but she refused. Instead, she stayed by my side. Meanwhile, Marcy sat at her kitchen table, overwhelmed by the events of the past 2 days. Thursday had been relatively quiet, but Friday had been anything but. At work, she was served with legal papers. Jace Redding was suing to determine if he was biologically related to her daughters. The truth was, she couldn't even be certain. It had been so long since the girls were conceived that the details were hazy. She had underestimated Heath. At first, she dismissed his threats as anger-driven outbursts, but when she saw the text he sent to all their friends and family, everything changed. The message was clear, and the damage was irreversible. Her lawyer explained that Jack legally qualified as her common-law partner from the moment she moved him into the house. That meant Heath's lawsuit against Jack would likely succeed, and the only question now was how much Jack would owe. The lawyer also told her that Heath's long-standing dedication to his family would make him a sympathetic figure in divorce court. She realized too late that he had every advantage, while she had none. For the first time, Marcy grasped the full extent of what she'd lost. Heath wasn't just going to win, he was going to move on without her, leaving her to deal with the wreckage. If Marcy had been able to prove Jack was contributing financially, such as by providing bank statements showing consistent rent payments over the last 3 years, her situation might have been different. Instead, there was no evidence to support that he had contributed anything toward household expenses. The court was left with the impression that Jack had been nothing more than a kept man. The real blow came at the end of the day when her supervisor called her into the office. The news was direct and devastating. "Marcy, I'm aware that you visited Mr. and Mrs. Klaus Rubenstein after hours on Thursday regarding a custody issue. They explained everything that happened the night before and asked for the state's guidance." Her supervisor's tone was icy. "I spoke with the children and advised the grandparents that if they obtained written consent from the father, the state would recognize them as temporary custodians until the court decides the case. And yes, I know they're your parents." Marcy's stomach dropped. Her supervisor continued, unflinching. "I can't transfer you yet, but as soon as a position opens elsewhere, I will. I also can't terminate you, but your reputation as a social worker in this area is ruined. No one will take your word on anything. Effective immediately, you're relegated to office work, and your entire caseload is being reassigned." Marcy had no defense. She knew she had only herself to blame. Her relentless pursuit of Jack had led her here. And now the consequences were undeniable. Saturday was packed with activity at the farm. Linda and Lauren were ecstatic when Bill walked them through the basics of operating the small motorcycles parked in the yard. Watching them, it was clear they were naturals. After 2 hours, Bill called it a day. "You'll be sore tomorrow if you don't stop now," he said. "And since you're already sweaty, go cool off in the pond." Betty and Maureen were growing closer, sharing laughter and stories as they prepped dinner. Around 4 in the afternoon, the girls were called inside to help. Since they'd never done much cooking, I went to check on them and found them peeling potatoes and chopping onions around the kitchen table, under Betty's watchful eye. Meanwhile, Bill fired up the grill to cook steaks, and I pitched in where I could. Dinner was a hit. Perfectly grilled steaks, potato salad, and baked beans, served outdoors at the picnic table. What struck me was that neither the TV nor their phones had been touched all day. It was as if the twins were discovering an entirely new way of life. By evening, they decided to head to bed early, worn out from the day's adventures. The rest of us stayed up, sharing a few beers and playing cards before calling it a night. Sunday after lunch, Maureen and the girls headed home. Before they left, Maureen handed me a handwritten witnessed letter granting Klaus and Betty temporary custody of the twins. Early Monday morning, Klaus called to thank me for getting the letter to him so quickly. He had taken it to the office himself, where it was copied for official records. The state had issued a legal notice confirming their temporary custodianship. As we chatted, Klaus shared details about Marcy and Jack's long-standing relationship, opening my eyes to things I hadn't known. On Friday morning, Jack Redding was served with legal papers in Austin, Texas, while picking up a shipment of medical equipment. At the same time, Marcy was served at the social services office. That afternoon, I received a text from Maureen asking for my waist size. When I asked why, she replied, "So we can go swimming with the girls." I texted back, 34. Later, while on a walk, I got a message from Marcy. It read, "Have you calmed down enough to talk?" I responded bluntly, "Nothing to talk about. Your parents and Maureen filled me in on everything, from sneaking out to meet Jack to where you are now. What I'm trying to figure out is this. If he's always been the one, why did you marry me?" She didn't reply. When Maureen arrived with the girls, their excitement was contagious. As Linda and Lauren ran to hug me, Maureen's radiant smile lit up the moment. After a warm hug from her, the girls asked me a quiet question, to which I nodded. The twins ran to greet Bill and Betty, and Maureen surprised me with a firm kiss on the lips, catching me off guard. "You need to hear what the girls just asked," I told her. We turned to listen as Maureen slipped her hand into mine. Lauren began, "We were wondering if it's okay to call you Grandpa and Grandma." Linda added, "Only if that's all right with you." Betty teared up, clearly overwhelmed. "Of course," she said, her voice trembling. Later she confided that she'd always longed to hear those words, but thought she never would, having been unable to have children of her own. After dinner, I updated Maureen on the situation. "Both Marcy and Jack have been served. It's official now." I showed her the last text I'd received from Marcy in my response. "She can't justify her actions," Maureen said. "If she tried, she'd have to face the truth about herself. And I don't think she's capable of that." "Enough about your sister," I replied. "When are you going to find someone who loves you the way you deserve?" "Don't be surprised, Heath," she said with a soft smile. I already have. The real challenge is getting him to see it. The next morning, Bill and I, both early risers, were enjoying freshly perked coffee outside. "Heath," he said, his tone thoughtful, "Betty is my second wife. My first did to me what Marcy's done to you." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "To remind you not to let your pain blind you to what's in front of you. Maureen has been here for you since day one. When you're ready, ask yourself why." His words lingered. I began to wonder, could Maureen want more? And if so, why? "What made you realize Betty was interested in you?" I asked. Bill chuckled. "A cast iron skillet to the head, figuratively speaking. She caught a neighbor girl flirting with me and made it clear how she felt. We couldn't have kids of our own, so we fostered for years. It gave us a purpose and a bond." His story gave me a lot to think about as I watched the sunrise over the farm. Our conversation ended as the rest of the household began to stir. The sound of voices and movement signaled the start of another busy day. After the twins spent 3 hours riding the motorcycles, they were ready to cool off, so we all headed to the pond. Bill and Betty brought down lawn chairs and watched us play a lively game of beach ball volleyball. Maureen looked incredible in her white bikini, her auburn hair pinned back, and her movements full of energy and grace. As she chased after the ball, her laughter rang out, and her confidence was impossible to ignore. I found myself captivated by her, something Bill's recent words had made me see differently. As we walked to the pond, I couldn't help but notice her effortless stride and the slight sway of her hips. The pond was deeper than I expected, fed by a small creek with a charming waterfall Bill had created by stacking railroad ties in a low section of the land. Our games were lighthearted and filled with laughter. We teamed up differently each round, with my daughters taking turns diving from my shoulders while I lifted them up from beneath the water. Eventually, Bill and Betty headed back to prepare dinner, and Linda and Lauren decided to join them. Maureen and I stayed in the pond, enjoying the quiet. Feeling playful, I dove beneath the surface and came up between her legs, flipping her into the water. She emerged laughing, her hair soaked, and her face glowing with joy. She swam closer, and as our eyes met, something shifted. I saw an emotion I hadn't recognized before. Without a word, we leaned into each other, our lips meeting in a kiss that was electric, filled with more passion and connection than I'd ever experienced. "Wow," I murmured, pulling back slightly. "That was intense." She smiled, her voice soft but confident. "You don't know how long I've waited for this." We embraced, the water surrounding us as we held each other tightly, sharing more kisses, our connection deepening with every touch. The world around us faded away until Bill's distant call broke through. "Supper will be ready in 20 minutes. We reluctantly broke apart and headed back to the house to change. As soon as we stepped inside, Betty gave us a knowing look. "Well, it seems like things are starting to fall into place," she said, grinning. "How did you manage to clue him in?" she asked Maureen. "She didn't," Bill interjected, laughing. "I told him about your legendary cast-iron frying pan swing." The twins overheard and demanded the story, which Bill happily shared, much to their delight. After supper, when the girls had gone to bed, tired out from fresh air and activity, I sat on the porch swing, enjoying the stillness. Maureen joined me, settling in beside me. I wrapped an arm around her as she leaned against my shoulder. "My mom figured it out last week when I brought the twins home," she said. "She told me I looked happier than I had in years, so I guess my poker face isn't as good as I thought." "How did she take it?" I asked. "I'm sure she has concerns with everything going on." "She asked if anything was happening yet, and I told her no," Maureen replied. "Then she asked how long I'd been in love with you. I told her, since the summer before you married Marcy." I was stunned. "That long? And it took all of this for me to notice?" "I was expecting a lecture," Maureen admitted, smiling softly. "Instead, she said if it works out, she'll help Dad come around. Then she told me something I didn't know. Her dad was my aunt's cast-off, and she thanks her sister for that every single day." As Maureen kissed me goodbye on Sunday, Lauren turned to Linda, who seemed surprised. "Aunt Maureen has been in love with Dad for years," she whispered. "It took what Mom did for him to finally figure it out. If Aunt Maureen gets her way, they'll be married as soon as the divorce is final." As they drove off, I couldn't help but wonder how my daughter had figured it out so easily. Monday morning, Bill suggested we take a walk. As we crossed the bridge over the creek to a nearby section of land, he gestured to the spot. "This would be a great place to build a house," he said. "That way Linda and Lauren could come over any time to ride the bikes, or the horses Betty and I are planning to buy." "Whose idea was this?" I asked, curious. Betty and Maureen's. They're planning to pitch it to you next week, he said with a laugh. Klaus called later that morning with surprising news. Jace Redding had obtained a court order for blood tests to determine Lauren and Linda's paternity. Klaus was devastated to learn there was any doubt. He'd believed Marcy's affair with Jack had only been going on for the past 3 years. He was so upset by the revelation that he marched into the social services office and confronted Marcy in front of her co-workers. "As far as I'm concerned, you're dead to me," he declared, his voice echoing through the building. Later, my mother-in-law called to inform me that Miss Connor had provided a notarized statement to my lawyer. She mentioned that Jack would be back in town on Wednesday and suggested I stay nearby to keep an eye on things. I arranged to stay with John Sexsmith on Tuesday night. Bill lent me his vehicle so I could slip into town unnoticed. As dusk settled, I called John to confirm he was home before pulling into his driveway. John greeted me warmly, ready to share updates on everything that had been happening. The night felt heavy with anticipation, but I was prepared to face whatever came next. It seemed Marcy had been entertaining another guest at the house since I left, and he was there even now. Peering through John's binoculars, I immediately recognized the man. It was Jack's older married brother, Jason. I called Jace Redding and asked him to come to the address where I was staying. When he arrived, I handed him the key to my house. "You need to see this for yourself," I told him. "You won't believe what I've uncovered." I explained that I had discovered the identity of the person filming Jack and Marcy. It was Jason, and at that very moment, Jason and Marcy were together in the third-floor bedroom. John and I watched as Jace walked across the street, unlocked the door, and entered my house. "What do you think he's going to do when he finds out?" John asked. "Jace is a proud man," I replied. "How he reacts depends entirely on what his pride drives him to do. I just hope it doesn't push him past his breaking point." Moments later, a bang echoed. Fearful, John called emergency. When police, fire, and ambulance arrived, we saw Marcy stumble out of the house, half-dressed, as Jason was led away in handcuffs. Concern replaced our initial amusement when Jace was carried out on a stretcher. John turned on his police scanner, and we learned Jace had entered the third-floor bedroom, and Jason, mistaking him for an intruder, shot him. Thankfully, the wound was to his shoulder and not life-threatening. Marcy, now fully dressed, spotted us outside. Her face went pale when she saw me. "I can't believe she was involved with both brothers," John muttered. "I suspected someone else, but not him," I replied. "I feel for Jace. He didn't deserve this." The next morning, I visited my in-laws. Klaus greeted me early, and over coffee I explained the events. His wife, Rose, was stunned, but welcomed me warmly. When Linda and Lauren came downstairs, they were thrilled to see me. After taking them to school, I spoke with Rose. We both agreed. Marcy had never truly loved me. Later, I visited Jace in the hospital. His wife hugged me tearfully. "This isn't your fault," I reassured her. "You're not responsible for your children's choices." Jace managed to smile. "You've always kept your cool, Heath." "I've come close," I admitted. "But I'm afraid if I ever lost it, I wouldn't stop." Jace chuckled. "Well, Jason's in jail. Jack's lost his trust fund, and the fallout is a mess. Want to manage the fleet again?" I declined, explaining I was pursuing a new chapter. At the transportation center, I watched Jack clock out for the last time. True to form, he left in a rage. Concerned, I asked John to keep an eye on my house. That evening, I surprised Maureen with roses and an invitation to dinner. Her emotional reaction confirmed her feelings. After dinner, John called with urgent news. Jack had returned home drunk and armed, blaming Marcy for everything. Confronting her with a Colt, neighbors heard bangs and called police. Marcy's injuries were severe. Despite surgery, she died from internal bleeding. I broke the news to Maureen, who called her parents. We met them at the hospital. The hardest part was telling Linda and Lauren. Klaus and I agreed on a closed-casket funeral. As we planned the arrangements, I reflected on how Marcy's choices had destroyed so many lives. After the burial, Klaus pulled me aside. "I had the girls tested. They aren't related to Jace. Also, how long has Maureen loved you?" "Since the summer before Marcy and I married," I admitted. Klaus smiled faintly. "Her sister throwing me away was the best thing that ever happened to me. If you and Maureen work out, you'll have my support." That marked the start of rebuilding my life. 5 years later, I watched Linda and Lauren wait for the bus while Maureen, now my wife, cared for our 2 preschool-age sons. Bill and Betty had become devoted grandparents. Our gas station and store became the heart of the growing village, now with a post office. On warm days, I enjoyed walking from our house by the pond to work. Jason and his wife visited often. Jason had served a short sentence, while Jack was in prison for manslaughter. Jack's ex-wife and kids moved to our village, starting fresh. Our community's name came from a sign Bill painted. We're all here because of circumstances. The name stuck, and so did our new beginning.